Okay, fine. Let's start. Unmute. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to today's presentation. Today we have a presentation on Cybersecurity CISO. So let's see about myself, a brief. This is Rajshekhar. I'm a security and data enthusiast where I'm very much interested to learn new technologies and identify the security issues or holes in the new technologies. And I'm also a data enthusiast in cybersecurity. So I have expertise in network security, thick client, thin client, web and mobile application, whatever coming in, and I try to fuzz around and find new vulnerabilities in those softwares and see how exactly it works and figuring out the new issues and performing assignments to help the organizations. So today's our agenda is that let's start with an overview of coding issues and what is the root cause of. Let's get started with the session. Developing an application, developers most probably or most oftenly tend to focus on the development of the applications, either miss or forget to look at the security perspective of the applications. Coding issues occur when developers or organizations with either unaware or ignore the security point of view. Let's say an organization is building a web application. So in that web application, security point of view, what they feel is they either consider having the encoded piece of code, or if the code is bit of obfuscated, and they feel okay, we have implemented these encoding mechanisms as a security mechanism, and they tell how exactly we need to perform or look at the security aspects of it. So let's understand what are the root causes of a secure coding or the coding issues. So the issues are like, the first factor that I would consider is cost factor, as most of our organizations, wanting a feature or any other perspective, the cost factor will come in. On that time, the organizations will simply develop the applications with the available resources or with the budget. So they tend to complete the application. Beyond that, we can use some organizations or business owners face issues with the time factor. How time factor impacts? Let's say we have a feature that we need to release it by today itself, or in this case the developer will focus more on we will understand how we can look at all these areas with the focus on security point of view as well. So let's say resources. How exactly resources? Organizations will hire a developer from the market. So in that case, the developer must be the organizations. Nowadays, bigger organizations are focusing on the secure coding practices, but there are many organizations that we also face while giving recommendations or mitigations to the company or the developers. What they do is if the organizations will look at whether the developer can build the applications in a more intended or efficient way, but they fail to see whether that person knows about security or not. And technology factor. How exactly the technology very frequent manner. In this case, the developer is not either aware of how that framework works or what are the business perspective of it, and they ignore the specifications. So this is where the security point of view. So now let's understand what exactly it knows the technology, how to use a tool or how to use a script. So this is the biggest threat to the companies or organizations. What happens is on the applications or the available technologies. As a result, some applications may fail, go down, or some applications may resist, or some applications are secure against that. So in this case, this is the reason that we need So secure coding is how secure or what is the approach or what are the areas where we can fix the vulnerabilities in the applications. So what are the standards that we follow as an SL7? As SL7 is a growing company, we incorporate all there is that OWASP code secure coding practices, and which tells us or tells any company source code while reviewing the source code in a very flow basis. User inputs goes into, or what are the functionalities where the user input goes into. So let's see how we can flow through this methodology. So the first process is that the user will log into the application. So in order to log in, he need to authenticate himself. So in the authentication mechanism, configurations, let's say if there is a code where the developer is validating the given new password is correct or not. So if he it is along with the username offered to the users. Let's say now if a user log into the application, he will have a low privilege users. With the low privilege user, and if the application does not validate, he will just type the /admin and he will access the actor which will validate this access control and then entered into the system. Now he will, so these kind of things we should evaluate and we need to figure out and fix those issues as well. If not, in this case, account is compromised entirely. So once we evaluate the session mechanism, then we need to validate the business logic. Can only validate the document. Maker can only create the document, but he cannot approve it. So in this case, if this is how we can validate, or we need to validate the logical flaws in the application as well. So once the main thing where all users the user inputs. Let's say if the input is being flown on to the SQL query, so that will lead to a data leakage to avoid any security. In that case, whether that JavaScript should get reflected back to the user. If the JavaScript, we need to identify which functions will reflect these data, and we need to implement either HTML entities or output encoding mechanism that will sanitize the special characters, converting any special character into LTGT semicolon or code semicolon similar to this. So this, once data is been retrieved. So now we need to validate what are the functions or what are all the places that the user input goes into these system commands code on the. So we need to verify whether that is required or not. URL part. This is where all the major attacks are coming in. So especially what are all the places data retrieval mechanisms. So there are many attacks with respect to URL. So the first attack that we look at is redirect. User is getting the web server, and we need to validate whether password or vulnerability validated. Now we need to verify how the resources are being coming up. File handling is a process which is very important, which will lead to very dangerous consequences. Why? Because bleak. So the attacks that might be relevant to this file handling are path traversal or local file inclusion, remote file inclusion, and reflective arbitrary file read access. So these kind of vulnerabilities are very much possible in the application areas that the user inputs will flow in. So whether the application is handling the exception mechanisms in a secure way, or application is throwing custom error pages, or in any source code related information. Let's say if an exception error will throw for the first directory / etc. etc. So this way it leads to or provides an attacker what all the files sources that are being used related to the application. Why? Let's say if any cybersecurity attack happen on your organization, or data is being stolen, or if any attacker or a malicious, you can verify who has performed what attack and how and from where what data has been extracted. So this is where we require logging mechanism to be more efficient. So once these processes are being performed, so we need to validate CSRF vulnerabilities as well. We need post request or XSRF token is secure against cross-site request forgery attacks. So once we come done with cross-site request forgery security or not, because the memory management vulnerabilities or memory management mechanism will lead to lot of different attacks for using this memory management if it is not properly handled. And we need to verify what is the memory size or buffer size that are being provided, and once we say in the application one particular resource, so in the application, for example, transfer this our applications at the loss load in a plain text manner, so that is really a issue. So we need to verify whether the data is being properly encrypted or not, and while we retrieve on the front end that are being properly hashed or encrypted, applications are secure. Few more vulnerability examples. So in a remote code execute URL http localhost /source.php, and if the data is being retrieved to validate at the backend, which is then go into the system who am I command, the user input before placing applications, or integrate all these functions in a staged manner or the approach that will help you better. Let's say there is an application which wants application. So to verify the attacker, what he will do is he will give the URL along with the semicolon and the ID. ID command is used to get the what is the exact permissions that are being provided for the user. So with this ID command, that will flow onto this google.com and a semicolon ID. So now two commands will execute in one particular area. So now let's see how SQL injections are being exploited or being identified. The user provides a user input that will flow into the get parameter that is being taken through get and is being stored on the ID parameter, where ID equal to $ID. As a result, so the user input is directly placed onto the SQL query, which will allow an SQL query, and it is being directly executed on the database. As a result, the database will provide all the information it is necessary. How exactly things work? So let's understand from source code how things are working. So in the source code, if you look, there is a pages parameter input to include function. So what is doing this include function? Include is just adding whatever we provide into the code. So here after this directory and fetching as a home.php, it will redirect me if I enter a input like this //etc password directory / the attacker is able to see the list of users in the mechanism. As you see in this example, if the user inputs are being passed on to these functions, the attacker can extract all the information. So let's see. Now let's understand how cross-site scripting vulnerability works. So cross-site scripting is abused by an attacker to execute JavaScript on those areas. What will happen if a JavaScript executes? So this is where the problem comes up, is that if a JavaScript executes, the attacker is able to retrieve the user sessions or session cookies, or he can redirect him to implement a malware or a keylogger that will ensure that will be link code back to the user. So echo does is just reflects whatever we enter. So what we are doing here in the in parameter, so that value is being stored on name parameter as through get method. That name parameter will just being reflected back to user. So as a result, if we implement document.location or something like that, what will happen? This cookie value will be sent to attacker without users knowing. So far we have understood how user inputs are being more dangerous when we are passing on to different functions without validating the user input. So the first thumb rule is that user indicated doesn't matter, he should be validated. So now let's see how we can integrate I have divided these things into three different areas. Let's say there are many of the people who are in the first so that is let's say now an organization, a startup to get more business. So what they do is they will hire a developer, and they simply they will ask him to build application. We want application of this kind of function. He will simply as the organization or the person is not having any much of security knowledge, but the developer, what we will do is he will build the application with all the business functionalities in a more attractive way. Heard from many of the people who has a web application, they will say, I have implemented HTTPS my site, now no one can't hack me. So that is not the thing. Related attacks, which are more simpler than that. So what happens is the developer doesn't have much of security knowledge. So as you are in the initial stage, you have a lot of mechanism or ways to secure your application. So how you need to do? You need which are more focused on security, or create a class for just for security purpose. It doesn't take much of the time. As ensure you are creating your own statement, or your data should be retrieved from the database, or if you are creating a user, how the data should be flown to database, and along with the parameterized query mechanism related vulnerabilities. And let's say now you have mitigated SQL injection. Now you want to look at other parts. Now you need to look at a most famous attack which will affect you. So how you need to handle? You need to do a output encoding mechanism with the, for example, you can use HTML entities which will convert all special characters like less than, greater than, single quote, double quotes into ampersand, LT, GT, quote, hash 39 semicolon layer. Now you need to validate the URLs. How the user input is coming through URLs, or any manipulations are happening in the URL, which will validate. This is the manual mechanism. You need to verify, are you using any system functions or not. If you are dir name, file underscore get, or get dir, these kind of functions, you need to verify particular areas. If the inputs are being passed on to these system functions. So we need to validate these system functions as well. So we need particular functions. So here we need to implement a universal layer which will accept only certain characters that you are intended to use, and verify whether those characters are added by your own self. Let's say now you have file upload functionalities. So user as a file. In this case, what you need to do is collect the data from user, but a file or not. Validate the extensions. Verify whether he is uploading any valid files or not. And all in the system, rename the file name and add your own extension. This way, what do JPG or whatever the format which you are intended. So in this case, now you have implemented this layer. There is another thing that you need to do, is that you need to validate the metadata of the images as well, as there are a lot of threats to metadata. Or let's say if you are a secure manner, or which will again put you in a risky manner. Let's have options that to prevent these kind of. Here, let's say while you are building an application and implement the similar output encoding mechanisms as a separate filter building process, so you can create a filters and you can patch those functions to these user inputs, which will help you secure yourself. So how? So here is the mechanism. What you can do for the temporary purpose. You can create the filters and you can pass the application all the special characters in a risky manner. So you can use this particular filter and then patch all the functions, all the user inputs for securing URLs, SQL queries, reflections, or file handling, or system functions. And you can validate and you can patch each function with appropriate code. This way you will be more secure and you will be able to help yourself, your organization, having a secure app develop, or you have built the application, go into each and every SQL statement, appropriate filters. Hope you are clear about how exactly all the major things is first thing, never try to, there is certain special characters which is required. And if you are passing any user inputs or into system functions or any to validate the user, all URLs are being properly validated. Ensure you blocking // notations in any of the manner, or ensure that you are allowing only whitelisted domains and do not allow an attacker to pass on, like example, and then implement a secure cryptographic mechanisms. So let's say if you are using any reference values and you can't avoid them, then ensure you are encrypting those values and then sending it to the server, and may not be able to validate or understand what is that value, and at the end to implement or secure yourself from the configuration part. You have secured application and you have implemented on your web server, but unfortunately web server leads like default passwords, admin panels, or the recommendations or the methodology that I have mentioned more deep. Verify that.